the reality is for, us writers is that a lot of us are actually quite good. Like a lot of us are actually fairly good at what we do. So being good just isn't quite enough anymore, especially when, there is limited spaces and there are so many of us out there who, want to be in these spaces and be creators. So I think some of these spaces aren't going to let us in on not on our merits, but they're not going to let us in based on discriminatory standards. So we have to make our own space.
Hello, and welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that helps you on your writing journey. My name is Harry Bartley, and I'm your host. So whenever you're an indie author, or whenever you're an aspiring author, you spend a lot of time asking for feedback from editors and agents, and just people that you're trying to get to read your work and give you some sense of like, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? And that kind of thing is especially hard whenever you're a marginalized author, just because like it's hard to get them to even pay attention to you. And that's why it's so important that anthologies exist, whether it's a short story collection or whether it's like collectives that are centered around marginalized communities that can sort of like tell the stories of those specific communities. And that's why I was so excited to invite Brent Lambert onto my show today. Brent is a Black queer writer and founding member of the FIA Literary Magazine, where he helped build one of the most vital platforms for Black voices in science fiction and fantasy, a team that went on to win a Hugo Award. He's also the author of A Necessary Chaos and has contributed to short fiction to a wide range of publications and anthologies. In this episode, Brent and I are going to dig into creative collaboration, how to find the right people, how to share a vision, and what it takes to bring a short story collection together. If you've ever wondered how to take your writing out of isolation and into community, this one's for you. So Brent, thank you so much for joining me. I'm super excited to chat again. And I wanted to sort of chat with you. I think the place to start, because I think that in your experience, especially, you did a lot of community building as sort of simultaneously with sort of like collaboration. So where does that is it's like a chicken and the egg thing, right? Like, is community building more important, or is collaboration like the place to start?
At least I think for my journey, it was definitely if I had like a gun to my head and I had to pick which one, I think the community building was probably the more the vital aspect, just because the reality is for us writers is that a lot of us are actually quite good. Like a lot of us are actually fairly good at what we do. So being good just isn't quite enough anymore, especially when, there is limited spaces and there are so many of us out there who, want to be in these spaces and be creators. So I think with Fire as an example, one of those things was realizing that like, okay, some of these spaces aren't going to let us in on not on our merits, but they're not going to let us in based on discriminatory standards. So we have to make our own space. So that's an aspect of it too. So I think community building is probably the more important of the two, at least in my journey, just because by one creating our own spaces, it allowed me to meet people who ended up going into different spaces and were willing to reach back to me to include me in those spaces too. So yeah, it's kind of like almost like a spider web effect.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a good point. That's sort of like part of that community building is sort of providing opportunities for other people, right? Like that's sort of like if you can do that, then people are then going to come to you with opportunities as well. Like it's sort of like a two-way street. And I think that that's sort of what I do a lot with this podcast because I know that like, we're all authors here and it's so hard to talk about your work and promote yourself. And I think that the vast majority of authors are just like, you want to help me promote 100%. Let me be on your thing and talk about it. And I think that it's just one of those things. It's like, I may not have the hugest listenership in the world, but there are people. And also it gives you stuff to promote. And there's probably tons of authors that have podcasts that are like, well, nobody's going to want to be on my show. But it's like, no, like just having a good conversation, being able to share that on social is like huge for promotion.
Yeah. And I think most people it's very rare that I turn down the an invite for a thing, if it's like just having a conversation, just because well, I just have this enthusiastic love of storytelling in general, so I do want to show up and talk about it. And I think it's the same for most of us. We have a deep love of stories, so you give us a mic to talk on, we're gonna talk. And I think what you find too is that I have to give this caveat because I think sometimes people, it's not a quid pro quo thing. It has to be from a genuine place. Like you can't go in expecting something back. I think, at least in my journey, especially, I don't ever do anything for anyone expecting them to do something for me in return. And generally speaking, what has happened is that, I think people recognize that, people pick up on it, and when they have a space where they can reach out a hand, they've done so.
Yeah, I think that I try to live by that Oprah quote about like don't lend somebody money if you don't if you expect it back. Like never expect money back if you're going to lend it. And I feel like that's true of not just like monetary things, but just like any kind of favor. Like if you're going to do a favor
Right,
for somebody, you're doing a favor for somebody and that is the end of it. And if they have a chance to help you, they probably will, but don't like expect that to happen because honestly,
right,
in publishing especially, like who knows who might get those opportunities to hand out, right?
right,
so
right,
so like there's some truth to just casting a wide net and just hoping that the people in your community are going to sort of find those opportunities that they can offer you in the future is sort of part of it. Like being able to sort of like and I constantly believe that it's sort of like the rising tide lifts all ships, right? So
yeah,
like, you know, if you're successful, what that means to me is it's queer stories are being told and it makes my work more viable, even if you would never have anything to offer me. Like, just the fact that you're making opportunities for people like me is like the bigger part of it, right?
right, right. And I never want to be the only one writing a certain kind of thing. I think, there's some of us, I think, that exist in this community who get a little bit stuck on this Highlander syndrome where they where, they see some success as the only one, and get a little threatened by other people telling similar kinds of stories. I see that more in trad pub than I do in indie, though. I will say I think indie writers tend to be a lot more, oh cool, you write the same thing, let's help each other out. So but I think, to your point, the more of us doing that are writing a thing, the more space it creates for other people to feel the freedom to write that same kind of thing, and also to take it into new directions. So, well, helping each other is helping yourself in the long run.
Yeah, it is interesting because, like, you know, like usually whenever people like us go to book festivals, we're the gay one there, right? Like, you're like the gay
Yeah.
person that people come to, which is sort of like a double edged sword. Like, on the one hand, it's helpful. On the other hand, if it's a community that isn't super open to that, it's super not helpful, right?
Right.
And
Right.
like both of us were at LavenderCon last year. Like, that was such a wild experience to be around so many, like, nobody was the gay one. We all were. And it was
Yes.
kind of cool to be in a space like that where there were so many of us doing what we're doing.
And it was so refreshing because it was like, I don't have to explain some of this 101 stuff to
Yeah.
you. I can say a thing and everyone in the room gets what I'm talking about. And I don't have to explain the joke. I can just tell the joke and we all laugh because we get the context.
Yeah.
And I think you just get richer experiences and richer stories when you have more of one kind of person in the room. Like, the more people of color, the more queer people you have, the more trans people you have all in the same room, I think the richer the experiences.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, when it comes to marginalized people telling stories, those are the new stories to be told, right? Because I firmly, I sort of am in that camp that's like, there's no new stories. We're all sort of like following the same formula. Like that's just true. But I've not seen that formula through like really specific lenses, you know? And we're sort of like the last frontier for like new original stories. So like people should be willing to like be open to that, you know?
Right. And I think that, like, all stories have probably been told in some way, shape, or form before, but our specific lens is one that I think there is some fertile ground there to explore, and and you see it, the fact that, like, I don't know, I think about necessary chaos, and like the fact that there's, like, I can't really think of too many other books where there's like a fantasy book where it's two gay black men on the cover still, and that book came out, I don't know, almost 3 years ago. So it's just like there's still ground to be covered. I don't want that to be the case. I actually want there to be like a whole bookshelf and I can find and my cover is not doesn't feel like a unicorn. So to your point, I think there's still so much ground to cover, even if the stories do have like, similar genres, similar formats. Because the thing is like when you see yourself in these stories, even if it's a story that you recognize, I think it changes something in your creative brain.
Yeah, I think a lot about like coming out stories because like people always say like we don't need any more coming out stories. We have so many, and it's like we don't need any more white suburban gay men coming out stories. We have plenty of
Right.
those, but there's
Right.
so many other nuances that we've not seen.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing you see with every trend in like
Hmm.
publishing. Like, oh well, we're done with romantasy, but the marginalized people didn't even get a chance to write their own yet. And you guys are already done. Like it,
Yeah.
and then you see it happen. It was the same thing with Grimdark, same thing with I think you had that explosion of like YA like fantasy for a while. And it's just like, yeah, every time the trend's over with, it's before any of us even get a chance to touch it. And I think that's the power of indies, especially like, and even though like most of my path has been a trap one, I'm still always going to like champion indies because I feel like that's where a lot of the real experimentation's happening. That's where a lot of the real like edge boundary pushing stuff is happening. And I think even now you're starting to see it where like, I mean, I have thoughts about why they do this, but you see these traditional publishers going up and scooping up the indie writers once they're successful. Indies are where you can kind of see that marginalized people getting the chance to really experiment and push. And I think in some ways sway the traditional publishing side into being more open to these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I've met plenty of queer authors that are now making a living just self-publishing, and they've really seemed to have no interest in trad at this point because like they're fine and successful doing what they're doing. And
I think it's amazing. I actually think, and I love it because, like, for me, I love the fact that they can do that and they exist because I think it literally kills any of the excuses that, like, you see trap publishers used to have about, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. There's people out there who are very much doing it and they're being very successful at it.
yeah. So I think where I'd like to take the conversation is sort of from their perspective of writers trying to sort of like break into these kinds of collections. So you can sort of take this whichever side you want to take it on. But you've been in a number of collections, right? But then you also did a lot of compiling for collections for FIA. First of all, how do you find these opportunities? And then secondly, what sort of things are you looking for when you're compiling them? Like what sort of things should you keep in mind?
So when I very first was starting out, Twitter used to be before its demise. Twitter used to be the place where I would find a lot of these open calls, submissions being open for various magazines and whatnot. And there is a website. They call it the I think Submission Grinder. I hoping I'm saying it right, but it's actually a website that lists a lot of different open calls. So I would use that as a resource. But also going back to the community aspect, a lot of stuff I would just find out from friends. Friends would be like, "Hey, this open call is going on right now." This is very early on, like when we were kind of all kind of had, I think, more of a grind mentality when I was first starting off. Me and a group of writers, we would all just challenge each other to, okay, this open call is happening. Let's all get a story in there. And so yeah, just having that community that's really going to inform you and kind of push you to enter into these things and define these things. And I would find like my favorite authors from these magazines that I liked, and I would just follow their social media. And a lot of times they would post things too about like, oh, this place has an open call. And also I think a bigger one, a big one too, is just start following publishers. What I also started doing was I looked at the editors for various books that I read, and I would follow them on social media. And a lot of times they would announce, oh, I have this anthology coming up, and just kind of like accepting that. Don't get discouraged. There's a lot of rejection in the beginning. Doesn't mean you don't have a space in these places. You just got to keep going. But in terms of finding it, I would just say, stalk people, stalk them on social media, and you'll find out about these various calls and whatnot.
Well, and I think the other side of that both of us have done at this point is build your own space. Like
Yeah.
if you feel like people aren't letting you in for reasons that feel like valid, then don't be afraid to sort of find people to work with and build sort of
Oh,
like a
yeah.
space for yourself. So it
Like,
seemed like Faya came together kind of organically. Talk a little bit about like that and how like sort of like that, like what made you
yeah.
guys motivated to do that?
So this was at the time when, like, I was very kind of first getting into the mix, and it was me and all the founders. We were all in the Slack together, and Fireside magazine at the time put out this report that kind of showed the dismal numbers of like Black authors getting published in the various science fiction and fantasy magazines. People's response to it was pretty disappointing. Very much like, oh, well, we don't get enough Black authors to submit. Or, oh,
Yeah.
we don't make people self identify.
There just
Or,
aren't black authors. How
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, oh, well, I can't really control that. So it's just, it's a bunch of BS. And so we all like, you know what? We're going to show them that there are plenty of Black authors and they are full of it. So we created Fire from that. At first it was funny. I think, and this part was disappointing. There was even like bigger Black name authors who kind of like wrote it off as like, oh, this is just a vanity project.
Yeah.
Kind of writing it off as like, oh, these are spoil sports or whatever. So LD Lewis, the godsend that she is, like, definitely was key to creating that like professional look for the magazine and like really, really making it look like we're serious. This isn't something you're gonna dismiss. And we just kind of grew from there. And I think what really I think made people kind of stand up and pay attention was the fact that like I think early on we got our cover artist got nominated for, I think it was a British Science Fiction Award, and she actually won. And I think, we started having authors who were appearing in our magazine that were going on to, get agents, get book deals. And so it kind of became harder very quickly to dismiss us as just
Yeah.
like, like, oh, these people are just bitter. Like, no, we're serious and we're actually showing you that there are Black authors out here. And, the excuse that, oh, well, they're just not out here, or I just don't know how to reach them isn't valid anymore.
Yeah, and I think that that does bring up an interesting point because the truth is, to be able to do that, you have to sort of like have that peer network built already. So like you probably already knew a number of other Black authors, right? Whenever you started doing this, and I think that that's maybe the thing that a lot of people feel, especially when you live in like a rural area or you feel sort of isolated. I think that might be sort of challenging, but I think that social media is still the tool there, right? Like being able to find people that are sort of like in your marginalized community doing the grind. And I think that what I have learned is that if you are in a marginalized community, like your people are your people, and like we're gonna find each other, right? Um, and I think the thing that is especially hard is to try to find people that are like that feel like peers and don't feel like they're like leagues ahead of you, because I think that you often feel like it's one or the other. Either you're with people who are also haven't done anything or haven't even started yet, or people who are like so well established and sort of like that middle. Because the truth is that middle is where a lot of the real talent is, but it's hard to kind of like wade through it to figure out like who is worth putting a relationship with. I guess that's a weird way to say it, but I think that that is sort of true. Like who, and I think that ultimately it's like who is actually serious about this, right? Because I think that at the end of the day, most of what any of these creative jobs are is just sort of like being willing to do the grind and being willing to kind of like keep at it. And you just got to find people that have that same sort of drive if you have that drive, you know?
Right. And I will say, I think, to some degree, the fire team was definitely some lightning in the bottle situation. Like, we definitely were like, we all happen to have that, like, just that grind mentality. And most of us, not all of us, but most of us were at the same level. I think Justina Ireland and Tony Troy Wiggins, they were a little bit further along than us. And I think Devon had actually self-published a couple of books too in advance. So we had a few people who were a little further along in their journeys than we were, but we all had that kind of like same level of enthusiasm. And I think we all also had that same level of just being agitated with like the industry's response to, this very statistical lack of like,
Yeah.
Black writers. So, um, but what I also think too, in terms of like finding your people, and this is more me like, I guess, calling out people who are further along. Like, is that, some of us who are further along have to be willing to take on a mentorship role
Yeah.
and be willing to tell people like, hey, this is how you do this thing, or hey, this person's taking advantage of you if they're trying to do this. Or because we did have a bit of a mentorship role in terms of PJ Lee Clark early on was he was already much further along in his career than us, and he was very wise in telling us like, okay, because I think before I embarked on Fire, I really did think that like my only path was self publishing because there was no space for Black writers, and PJ Lee Clark was very much like no, like his logic I always think about. He's like, there's money on the table and they're eating it all up, and no, you go to that table and you get some of it too. And so he was very much kind of like our mentor, and sort of guiding us in like the norms of the industry and things to look for and expect. And so I think um we have to, those of us who get further along in our careers, we have to remember to put that ladder back down to people who are, newer and wanting to enter into the field, and give them that knowledge, and make their journeys a little easier the same way that our journeys were. So that's kind of like my own my call in to those of us who are further along. Like, if we want to see more of ourselves in the industry, we have to also do our own work and build our own thing, but we have to be willing to put the ladder down to others too.
Thank you guys so much. I'm so happy you guys are on this journey with me. It is a long journey, and it's fun to have people to be on it with. I interviewed Sam J. Miller, our mutual friend, before I interviewed
Yeah,
you, and he's like quite a bit further along than both of us, but he doesn't really feel that way when you talk to him. Like he feels like one of us, and he's very grounded. And I think that most of us are that way. And I think that it's really easy because I mean, like, it'd be easy for me to feel intimidated by somebody like you because, like, you're traditionally published, right? Like, there's this like weird thing where it's
right, yeah,
like
right,
a
right,
traditionally published author is like so much more established than
right,
when at the end of the day, like, we're probably similar aged and still like doing the same thing, and that doesn't
yeah,
make either of us like more experienced than the other. Because honestly, I probably have experience in other areas, like as a self-published author, especially
yes,
that you don't have. That you may have
yes.
questions about self-publishing later that you might reach out to me for. You know?
Oh, absolutely. There are things like self-published authors do, and I'm like, I am so impressed, and I am so like in awe of it, just from a pure marketing standpoint. The things that y'all take on, and yeah. So to your point, yeah, I think that just remembering that, like, we all are, and writers are notoriously hard on themselves anyway. The few of us that walk around thinking that like we're the absolute top tiers, pretty much figure out to stay away from them early on. Like, it's not very hard to figure out who those of us that have that attitude are.
Yeah, and the truth is, most even like the biggest authors are still pretty approachable because we're not like celebrities. Like none of us real.
Oh,
I guess a handful of us are, but most of us aren't. And I think that that's something to keep in mind too. Is like most authors are just people that love storytelling, and
yeah.
they're sort of excited to talk about it with most people who want to talk about it with them. So
Yeah, especially if they feel the energy is genuine and the enthusiasm is coming from a good place. I mean, I years and years ago, I had the chance to meet Victoria Schwab, the most pleasant person ever, and like this is like a New York Times #1 best-selling author. Like, a short story got adapted into a Netflix series. So like,
yeah, and I think too, at the end of the day, when you're an author and you have a book released, period, however it's released, like if you're at a book festival with a booth, like you're at the same level as everyone else there, right? Like everyone there has a booth with a book to sell with people that have never heard of them that want to know what their book is about, and you have to sell it to them. And we're all doing that. And I think that sort of realizing that also puts it a bit into perspective, which is like people may have seen your book on TikTok, but that doesn't mean that they want to buy it because like there's a crossover there that you got to still make them come over that hump.
right. And I think like this is more on the craft creative side, but I love the advice of like going on Goodreads, finding your favorite book and reading the 1-star reviews. Like, you will see like even the things that like you adore and love and like consider valuable to you. there's somebody out there who hates it.
Yeah.
Like, so there's no such thing as any of us being too far above being getting criticism for stuff.
Yeah. So since you've put together these collections before, you found people, what do you look for in a story? Like what sort of things do you try to put out? Like whenever you're selecting things, what makes a story like stand out to you?
So for me, I try to be intentional about the author makeup of a particular like anthology or collection. And people always, well, not people, there's certain people that get a little like squeamish when you say like intentionally choosing the author makeup because they think that means like, oh, you're skipping over a good story because you already have a straight white man. It's like, okay, that just tells me you don't really edit much because in my experience, I have never had a situation where I haven't had an abundance of good stories. Like I've never been in a situation where like I have like 10 slots to fill and only 5 good stories. Every time it's like I have 10 slots to fill and I have 50 good stories. And then at that point, it's like, okay, these 50 stories are all good. Now I have to be intentional about the makeup of this anthology. So that's kind of like the first thing. I end up having a lot of good stories, and I have to decide, okay, I do want to have queer representation. I do want to have trans representation. I do want to have, if possible, someone that might be ace. These things, these kinds of representation, it matters. So that's one thing. I try to be intentional about the makeup, and then from there, I think about, okay, I don't want the same kinds of stories, even if they're good. So if it's a horror collection, I don't want 10 haunted house stories, unless the theme, was haunted houses. But if it's a general horror collection or something, I'm going to want to have, okay, one good haunted house story, one good slasher story, one good demon hunter story or whatever. And so then that becomes that breakdown. Sometimes I do break the rules. Sometimes it's like, yo, these are just two really, really good stories about the same thing. They're both just going to go in it. And then from there, it's also a matter of just like, okay, what do I want someone once they read the collection? What do I want them to walk away from feeling about the overall collection? I wasn't the editor from this one. I was just an author in this one, but I was recently in this one called "I Want That Twink Obliterated," which was this pulpy, gay science fiction fantasy anthology. And I read the whole thing. And once I walked away from that, what I felt was like, this anthology is truly a repudiation of, it's a love letter to, but also a repudiation of like the hyper masculinity of, those two genres and making it just gay as hell. And, when I'm on the editor side, I think about that too. Like, what do I want people to walk away from once they read the entire collection?
So if anybody's listening that doesn't know, Starlight King Press, my publishing company, is putting together a collection about loss. But whenever I came up with that theme, it truly was just out of the air. What's a theme that's interesting that I haven't seen a lot of collections about? But then as I started thinking about it, it was like, well, this is a really big thing in my life right now specifically. And it is so funny how even when you don't think about it, like the things that are actually really relevant to you are going to like come to you. And you're going to realize that these things you're putting together are far more personal than you thought they were going to be,
And I think too, like it's, especially on the editing side, you get to, it's kind of like a double-edged story where you have to kind of, like you said, a lot of these stories do like carry some personal weight to them, and you have to be able to be like the objective like curator, and at the same time also still be the creative. And so yeah, it can be a balancing act. It's hard. Like, I always tell people like it, and choosing the stories in that end up in a thing is never easy. I'm always having to like step away from it for a little bit, go grab some dinner or something and think and like marinate or sleep on it, just because, like I said before, there's just so many good writers out there. There's not a lack of good writers out there. So that is the challenge. I think that we overflow with talent.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. So obviously you've read a ton of stories that you've loved that probably haven't made the cut into collections for one reason or another. Do you ever think like maybe this will fit? Like I should hang on to this and make another collection that could center this, or do you just sort of like let it go so that author can find another home for it potentially?
Usually, at least so far, I've just let it go, just because I think, at least for me, I feel like it's kinder to the author to let them like take the story and do what they will with it later. Unless I just have something immediately
Yeah.
like I have this other thing that I'm immediately working on, it could cycle into that. Then maybe, but I just haven't been in that situation. Usually it's like, oh, this would be months and months down the line. And yeah, I just don't feel like it's fair. I'm like, take your story, take it elsewhere. And if it is one of those ones where I can like give personal notes, I'll definitely try to give them a personal note to like let them know, like, hey, this is really good. Like, pursue it elsewhere.
Well, and that's the thing that separates us from the agents that you query that never get back to you, right? Is like we have the ability as sort of like people working in sort of like the indie realm to like give that time to actually provide quality feedback and give people like actual some insights into how to make it better or what was good about it and why it didn't fit this specific collection, which I
Yeah.
think is what people are ultimately looking for. Because getting a no with no context is like one of the hardest things to get, and I think that as an author, you sort of get to this point where you just let it roll off your back because you get so many of them.
Yeah, you get so
But
many.
but like it is very hard, especially when you're new. I think to kind of like build up that tolerance. So
Yeah, yeah.
so I think as editors, as people on the other side, it's important to sort of like remember that and not be so, cold to people who are just trying to tell a good story.
Well, and I think one of the things I love about Fire, and they still do this even to this day, but we did it from the very beginning, was that like every single submission got some kind of feedback from it. Like, and it's time consuming. It definitely, involves some man hours. But I think ultimately, especially for marginalized communities and marginalized writers, I think getting that feedback, especially early on, is so important because, like you said, so many of us would just get a no with no context.
Yeah.
And for us, I think it's harder to get that no context because we just don't know if that's because of who we are or if it's
Right.
because of the actual writing. And so I think that's the value too in having these spaces, these magazines, these anthologies or whatever that are exclusively for marginalized communities, because you can create that almost that safety net of knowing like, okay, this has nothing to do with who you are. That we're this is
Yeah.
just about, about craft and story and curation. It has nothing to do with your identity.
Yeah, it is actually kind of funny because I feel like I would be far more likely to pick stories if I was doing an open call and I had a lot of submissions. I probably would be far more likely to pick stories by somebody marginalized than somebody not. I think that's
Yeah,
just part of being part of the community, right?
right. And I think our lens, and this also, I think, why it's so important to have people like us on the other side of it, because there are cues and things that like we can pick up on that, there are kind of like identifiers that I think, maybe a straight editor wouldn't know to pick up on. And for me, I think especially not having like edited some things that aren't necessarily my cultural context. One thing I wish a lot of editors who come from maybe majority groups would do is just kind of like learn to accept that a story can be good even if it's not speaking to you directly, or
Yeah.
even if it's not something you get right away.
This is going to sound a bit counterintuitive, but I think it's just true. If you're putting together this stuff, like, don't care about like marketability and like if it's going to sell or whatever, because who buys short story collections, period, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's just the reality. There's a reason why publishers don't do them that often.
yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is the exposure. The point is to kind of like provide a platform for people. And the point is to give
Yeah.
people the opportunity to put on their resume and send it to an agent that says, I've been published in this collection, because that
Yes.
lends credibility to people that have no other credits.
Oh yeah, to have that credit, it does go a long way to be able to say like, "Oh, I've been published in this, and this." Also, too, the thing with short fiction is that like that opens you up for awards potentially, and awards, they don't necessarily lead to an agent, they don't necessarily lead to a book deal, but every little thing is like putting an extra lotto ticket in the in the slot machine or whatever, however that metaphor would work. But yeah, it's like everything adds to your potential of being recognized. So you're not necessarily going to make a ton of money. And like you said, most publishers aren't buying these things. It is mostly to show the community that these authors exist, these stories exist, give us a space to discuss them, and yeah, and help these authors build their platforms. When you work with other people and create these collections, you really do just you open as many doors for yourself as you do for anyone else.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good point because like I initially had planned to like push through my own story, right? Because like that's the most thing that makes sense to me. Like I'm the author, so I'm going to push the thing that is mine. But then it was like it actually makes far more sense to help somebody else out. But beyond that, it makes my press look more credible. And it's something that I think that you don't really think about until after the fact. And it's like, no, like it's helpful to sort of like be submitting this other, especially because I have like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 first time authors in this collection. Any one of those people, if I could push them for awards, like that helps them get a foothold in the industry that they didn't have previously. And like that really is something that it's paying it forward, right? Like it's actually, even if nothing comes from it, like their face was in front of, however many like people in the award process. And that's not nothing.
Right. No, it's not. And if you're constantly putting yourself out there, you're constantly having something in somebody's collection or anthology or magazine, whatever, that does help to build profile. And, and I do think that there's so much validity in like making your own space and like making space for other people and using that it's not selfish to collaborate to ultimately help build your own platform too.
Yeah. And I think that if being selfish is helping somebody else succeed, then be as selfish as you want, right?
Right. Go for it. Be selfish. Who cares? Yeah.
So thanks so much for joining, Britt. But this was great. If anybody would like to find you, where should they go to do that?
Easiest place to find me is my website, brentclambert.com. Same name for Blue Sky. Also for Instagram is Brent C. Lambert Writes. You can find me there. I am probably the most active, I would say, probably on Instagram and Blue Sky. Yeah, that'd be easiest place to find me.
So the one final question I've been asking everybody in this new relaunch, Brent, what have you been a fan of lately? Like what TV show, movie, book, what is a thing that you've been consuming lately that you think people should know about?
Okay, so I am actually reading this new book right now from Kate Elliott. It's called The Witch Roads. It's pretty good. I'm really, really enjoying it. It's, you know what, on this, it feels, which is what I love about Kate, it feels by the numbers at first. And then you start to realize like, oh, there's actually some really good political commentary happening here. And, it's being done through the lens of a character that is a societal outcast in a way. So, yeah, I think so often fantasy can be like, oh, let's talk about the queens, the kings, and princes, which I like. Don't get me wrong. But it's nice to see an epic fantasy that focuses on someone that is basically the equivalent of a country mailman. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. I'll check it out.
I've been reading the Giant Size X-Men books that they've been releasing with Ms. Marvel basically being in all of the like major X-Men storylines. And I'm a big Kamala Khan fan. So it's just sort of fun to see her in these environments. And also just sort of fun to revisit these classic X-Men stories. Because X-Men are very much a metaphor for marginalized people, right? Like it's not, they're not subtle about it. But thank you so much for joining me. I think this was great. I think a lot of people will learn a lot about how to get published and how to create collections too. Like nobody talks about that, right?
Yeah. So I'm hoping it was informative in some way.
If you're enjoying Most Writers Are Fans, please like, subscribe, follow on all the different things. Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, all those places is the best way to spread our show. Talk to you soon. Most Writers Are Fans is a Starlight King production. This episode was edited by Gabriel Gould. You can watch video episodes on YouTube and Spotify and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss a new conversation about the craft of storytelling. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the show. It really helps us reach more writers and readers like you. To leave a comment, send a message, or even record a voice message, visit mostwritersaretfans.com or email us anytime at press@starlightkingpress.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, don't be afraid to tell your story.